retired teacher of English as a second language. I spent my working life living overseas and traveling around the world. Now I'm a grumpy old retired codger settled into my nest here in Oregon, USA. It's my honor to introduce Vaylor and you to Nina Hagen's 1982 album, Nunsexmonkrock. I graduated from college and I moved to Tokyo, Japan, leaving my whole album collection behind. And I was living in Tokyo in a little apartment, and I had a little cassette player, and I was just buying cassettes as I found them. And I found this album. That was 1983, so a year after this album came out. I used to blast it through the thin walls of this apartment building that I lived in. And nobody seemed to mind. We were all foreigners, and we were all artists or seekers of some sort. And I think people, even the people who lived there, actually appreciated this album. So we were all a little crazy. This might well be the most psychedelic album I know of. Explosive psychedelia would be a description to orient someone who's a newcomer and wants to discover this album. To my ears, it's not just another good and interesting album, it's a rare treasure.
That's David Bennett of Albany, Oregon. David's a songwriter and musician with a collection of original, mostly instrumental works on his YouTube page, which I encourage you all to check out. David suggested this week's album, Nunsexmonkrock by Nina Hagen. Wait, Nina Hagen? Didn't she get a talk show host fired after? Going into this week, I have to admit to knowing pretty much nothing about Nina Hagen, but it's safe to say I'm aware of her reputation. One thing about growing up in the 70s and 80s was that there was a large number of lurid tales floating around about certain musicians that, at the time, we had no way of verifying. There was Led Zeppelin and the Mud Shark. There was Ozzy and the Bat. There was G.G. Allin and his lower GI tract. There was Rod Stewart and a stomach pump. Or was it Mick Jagger? Or was it David Bowie? Or was it anyway? Another of the stories was Nina Hagen and her appearance on a talk show where she demonstrated certain techniques for self-care, which resulted in the host of the show getting fired. But here we are in 2023, and we can now answer some of these burning questions from our childhood. And it turns out, yes, Nina Hagen really did pantomime some of her favorite means of entertaining herself on a late-night panel show in Austria called Club 2.
Gerade rauszukommen, indem ich von Women's Sex erzähle.
And yes, its host, Dietrich Sifrans, really did step down as a result. And that piece of information officially counts as the one thing I know about Nina Hagen. Still know nothing about her music. So if you'll pardon me a moment, it's time for a bit of Nunsexmonkrock. Meanwhile, David, why don't you fill us in a little bit more about this?
The album arises from crisis, and it carries a message of faith and hope. This album heralds the arrival of Nina Hagen's newborn daughter, who she named Cosma Shiva. The father of the child was a guitar player, Nina's boyfriend. He was a junkie. He wrote the song Smack Jack, which is on this album, but he doesn't play on the album. That boyfriend died of AIDS a few years later. Nina Hagen said that he loved heroin more than he loved her or the child. But I want to emphasize this. Apart from the fact that she was from across the wall and that she was having a child and that this is essentially a concept album about bringing new life into this world, I never knew any of those biographical details about the boyfriend or whatever during all the years that I've been enthralled by this album. I just learned some of those things while doing this project for Vaylor. I even wonder if knowing some of that sort of thing might obstruct with letting this album do its work on you.
Before I get into the music, you gotta check out the credits on this album. First of all, it was produced by Mike Thorne, who worked with a ton of prog folks like Camel and Soft Machine, but also with punk and new wave folks like Soft Cell and the Buzzcocks. And let's talk for a minute about Nina Hagen's band on this album. Chris Spedding on guitar, who was on those fabulous early Jack Bruce albums, Songs for a Tailor and Harmony Row. but also on releases by Paul McCartney, Mama Cass, Harry Nilsson, even Elton John's Madman Across the Water. On drums, Alan Schwartzberg, who was the drummer on Tie a Yellow Ribbon by Tony Orlando and Dawn. And also on the Peter Gabriel solo album, the first one with Salisbury Hill. Also on the album Reality by James Brown. And on keyboards and synthesizers, wait for it, Paul Schaefer.
Oh, holy night, light so brightly shining.
And knowing this fact, that Nina Hagen had hired some top-tier studio musicians as her band, that at least partially explains what I'm hearing on the first spin. You ever listen to song poems? For those of you unfamiliar with the concept of song poems, once upon a time you used to be able to mail your poetry plus like $150 to this company who would pay studio musicians to record an original song using your poem for its vocals. Then you'd get like a 45 of the finished tune in the mail. And while plenty of dumbasses use this to create intentionally crass tunes about Stevie Wonder, there was also a core group of folks sincerely trying to make it big by sending their heartfelt and utterly bonkers poetry to get the professional studio treatment.
Disco, disco, disco. I am going to Mount Kisco.
Tom Ardolino of NRBQ compiled a bunch of the good ones into a group of albums called collectively MSR Madness. Listen to them if you can, especially the first volume called Beat of the Traps.
I am going to buy Crisco to bake a cake so I can disco, disco, disco.
I bring all this up because listening to Nina Hagen for the first time is a lot like listening to song poems. That is, the backing tracks, the accompaniment. It's all flawlessly executed and immaculately produced. There's not a note out of place from any instrument on any of the 10 tracks on Nunsexmonkrock. But over the top of these immaculate tracks, complete banana pants. But unlike song poems, whose vocals are earnest and heartfelt, but also fiercely amateurish, Nina Hagen is intelligent, cynical, blasphemous, prurient, and clearly out of her tiny little mind. Plus, she multi-tracks herself on just about every song, using a stunning Beefheartian library of vocal styles, from gravelly demon voice to kawaii little schoolgirl to Marlena Dietrich-style torch song crooner to horn-helmeted operatic bombacity. The first time that Anti-World started, I thought for a minute we might be in Bjork territory, as the groove and the spoken intro reminded me a bit of Human Behavior from Bjork's first album. But as soon as she went into her weird demon voice, that notion went right out the window. The chords ascending by minor thirds in the chorus, though, those were cool. Smackjack is the one that refuses to unstick itself from my cranium. That chorus is so over the top. Not sure yet if this is a good thing or if it'll end up slowly driving me insane. Tiachitaro is more of a tone poem thing than anything else, alternating between squeaky schoolgirl cuteness and languid contralto choruses. Dreadlove. She sings the song's title and choruses in full-throated Ronnie James Dio style, but then switches to utter incomprehensibility for the verses. The song form has some interesting movement, and there's actually a defined bridge about halfway in. The only song that does that on this album. And when she goes into the repeated Nunsexmonkrock at the end of Dreadlove, delivered in that kind of mocking deadpan, I can't help but hear nonsense punk rock. Maybe that was intentional. Future Is Now is kind of a slow 6/8, alternating with some more up-tempo and syncopated sections, punctuated with weird vocal burblings. Honestly, though, I think Future Is Now would have been better, more effective, if it had stopped after like the second repetition. Born in 6/8, kind of a dirt simple Iggy and the Stooges style tune. But I don't know. This one seemed to vibe harder than most of the songs on this album. Iki Maska. This one's wild. The song form itself couldn't be simpler. It's just like the Peter Gunn riff, right? Down, 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 down. It repeats with a single 7-sharp 9 chord over the top, and that's literally it. There's only the one bar of music that's repeated for the entire song. But over the top, there's the wildest assortment of vocal histrionics, melodies that shouldn't work but end up somehow fitting, a call and response that ends up becoming part of the backing track, multiple competing vocal lines with different lyrics all on top of each other. It's wacky. In Dr. Art, Nina Hagen proclaims she's the chosen one in about 12 different voices. She does seem to contain multitudes. And ending the album are Cosmic Shiva followed by UFO. The disco feel and the lower dynamics make it feel as if the music is kind of run out of steam, but her lyrics lend these last couple of tunes a Church of the Subgenius UFO cult kind of a feel. As of now, I'm just confused. Look, there's no denying the catchiness of some of this music, but so far, I can't find my way to a deeper understanding. Okay, so I'm going to spin Nunsexmonkrock for about a week and hope I come back reasonably intelligible. Meanwhile, David, why don't you tell everyone what this album means to you?
Nina Hagen has always been, still is, she still releases albums today. She's a seeker, and she's all about positive energy, and you can believe that. I'll grant you, on this album, sometimes when she speaks of God the Father or God the King, there can be a dark, ominous tone to it, but that's just the shadow side. Whether she's using Buddhist or Christian imagery or whatever, she is not trying to knock it. She's trying to tap into it. She has spoken of herself as a preacher, and that's it. Being inspired can resemble a nervous breakdown or a manic phase gone supernova. It can't last long, it can be wrenching and exhausting, but the works that result are treasures. She's aware of it, she knows that she is at a special place creatively, and she opens up to it. She lets it flow through her. She gets the band to play along. She gets it recorded quite nicely. This is craftsmanship. This is a project. This took time. This is an epic achievement. And she's trying to conjure healing and freedom and light into the world in which she is bringing her new child. She's trying to speak into existence the good spirits and energy she wants to accompany her newborn child in this world, and the listener, who I think she cares about the listener as deeply as a good preacher cares about their flock.
As wild as Nunsexmonkrock is, I think the research I did on Nina Hagen turned out to be just as wild. For those of you that are already fans, this might be old news, but I found it fascinating. For starters, Nina Hagen was born in communist East Berlin, but her family were all artists and dissidents and stuff. When she was 11, her mom, herself a pretty well-known actress, started seeing this guy named Wolf Biermann, who was an anti-establishment singer-songwriter guy. After dropping out of school, Nina Hagen joined an East German pop group called Automobil, and they had a pretty decent-sized hit with a tune called Du hast den Farbfilm vergessen.
Du hast den Farbfilm vergessen, mein Michael.
But while she was still performing with Automobil, the East German government gave Wolf Biermann permission to perform in Cologne, but then refused his entrance back into East Germany. This resulted in both Nina and her mom being able to leave the country to be with him. And that's how they left East Germany. And this only scratches the surface. There's a lot to Nina Hagen's family and childhood that is worth looking into. But let's get back into Nunsexmonkrock in particular. Listening to this music for a week straight, I can say without hesitation that these tunes will get lodged permanently into your brain. No escaping that. What I keep coming back to is the dichotomy of, on one hand, the perfectly executed, almost sterile instrumental tracks, and on the other hand, Nina Hagen's seemingly unhinged performance layered over them. But it's the layering that kills me. On first glance, it's easy to make assumptions about letting wild and crazy Nina Hagen loose in the studio after professional musicians have finished crafting and finally polishing tracks for her, than just recording the madness that ensues. But it's in those vocal layered multi-tracks that you see that this can't be an accurate picture of what actually happened. Nina Hagen has the chops to be able to maintain tone and timbre and pitch throughout all of her various vocal personae. Just look at the call and response tracks in Iki Maska, for example. That only works if she can execute vocally every bit as flawlessly as the musicians recording the backing tracks. And that broke my brain a little, because no matter how simple the music was on some of these tracks, the vocal performance was always intense, difficult, and high energy, and often way outside the bounds of good taste or radio-friendly. So how do I, in the end, describe the music on Nunsexmonkrock? It's way too nailed down to be avant-garde. It's way too subversive to be pop. It's way too polished to be punk. To call it performance art would be a disservice to how catchy it can be. Experimental? Maybe? But so is Ryuichi Sakamoto, and Nunsexmonkrock sounds nothing like Thousand Knives. I'm definitely glad that I know this music now. Final rating, scale of 1 to 10, I give Nunsexmonkrock a signed copy of Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, in the original German, of course. See you next week.